Good morning, one and all. Boker Tov. I trust that you are all well. Lovely to see you. Wasn't it very, very special and memorable last night to be joined by Rabbi Michael Plasko, our emeritus chazan of 40 years service to Woodside Park, 43 years. And it was wonderful to hear his recollections and his memories and stories. It was really, really heartwarming. Today's learning, as every morning, friends, is dedicated in memory of all those that we are saying Kaddish for in the community, as well as those who have Yortzeit today. Good morning to Peter, to Clarice, and all those that are still joining us. So I want to share with you a very special thought, and we will try and get up on the website at a later point. I'm speaking tonight at Barnet Council. They have a council meetings, and I'm delivering a short address at the beginning to mark Holocaust Memorial Day, which is this coming week, and therefore I'll be speaking, and I'll try and get a copy of it for you all. So this week's parasha, we already mentioned, it really lays down the very basic tenets in terms of justice, jurisprudence, common law, tort law, negligence, the laws that we're all familiar with between us and our fellow human being. And we're told at the beginning of the parasha that in the same way that the word ve'ela means and these. The first word of the Torah portion is, it says and these. The word and is always joining on to what came previously. And therefore, Rashi and others point out that just as all of what came before was from Sinai, in other words, last week, the Ten Commandments, etc., so too these laws are also from Sinai. And the question I'm sure we all have is that's baffling. You know, why would we think any different? And the answer should be self-evident, that we are all familiar with every legal system, every society, every state has basic tenets of that legal system are common law, are based on the same principles, right, of ethical and moral living, in terms of damages and torts and the like. And therefore, it's rational, it's logical. If I want to ensure that I can live side by side with you, then we need to set up a system, and which will ensure that my rights and my property and I am safeguarded and protected. And similarly, you also, your rights, your responsibilities, your property and possessions are all looked after and protected in law. So therefore, really, if we think about it, good morning. Sorry, a lot of people there's a flurry of activity, a rush through the door. Good morning, Deborah, Clarice, Carol, and Estelle, still all joining us. So what we have said so far for those that came in late was as follows, friends, that that the word ve'ela, the very first word of the parasha of the Torah portion this week, says and these, when it refers to the laws, the laws of between us, the interpersonal laws which we have, which are in every society. And the question, and therefore the word and these is to join on to the laws of last week. And just as last week's laws were given at Sinai and are of divine origin, so are this week's laws. And the question is obvious: why would we think any different? And the answer is obvious. That when it comes to these laws, it's very rational, logical, common sense that we want to protect our rights, our property, ourselves. And therefore, a person may think, actually, it's a matter of me doing what's right for me. And therefore, it could become, in certain societies, quite subjective. You decide how to protect your rights, and I decide how to protect my rights. I decide the definition of what is life. You decide what's the definition of life. what is damage, what is not damage. And if we leave it to subjectivity, there's a real danger of where you have the wrong people, you have rogue states, you have demagogues and totalitarian regimes, as we've seen time and again, right? That it is easy for power to fall into the wrong hands, and if it's a matter of common sense, then a person can have biases and decide what is right in law and what is wrong. And therefore, the Torah gives us the blueprint. It lays down for us the blueprint, friends, as to how we are meant to interact together, how we are meant to ensure that we treat each other with respect, that we don't infringe or impinge on each other's rights and in each other's space, and we don't cause others harm. When it came to with speaking about Holocaust Memorial, and there's one story that always sends a shiver down my spine. And I know it's early in the morning, but I hope you don't mind, since it's Holocaust Memorial Week, me sharing with you a very, very startling, frightening, and upsetting story. I have warned you. There was a discussion in the lead up to the Holocaust in Germany between certain of the sages, certain great rabbis. They saw a very cultured nation, Germany, and the initial, Nazi party prided themselves in being exceptionally intellectual, brilliant minds, academics. They attracted everyone and anyone. And in fact, at one say we know that I think over half of those that were sitting around the table, I think there were 14 or 15, I think there were 7 or 8 that were doctors that had doctorates from some of the best universities in Germany. So therefore, that shows you the caliber of people. And yet, we know that they were able to, those great intellectual minds, those rational minds, were able to scheme and to plan the final solution and create one of the darkest periods in world history. And in fact, the story goes, these sages, these rabbis and students were discussing before the war, Germany seemed so cultured, so enlightened, that it must be that actually they could learn character traits from the Germans, from the Nazis, right? And this is at the very beginning of when they were, when Germany was still very civil. And Rabbi Hutner, who was there, he disagreed vehemently with this other sage and this other person, and he said, no, we learn from the Torah, not from anywhere else. It doesn't mean the fact that some of their values coincide with ours, that necessarily they're doing everything with the right intentions. And it was that one of the points that was made was that everything that they say and they do is nicht wahr, which means isn't it so? In other words, they had wonderful etiquette in Germany. And the story goes that this yeshiva student who was disagreeing with Rav Hutner was saying that we should learn from the Germans. If we fast forward to the 1970s, they both survived the war, and Rabbi Hutner became one of the great sages in America. And he was giving a lecture, and at the end of the lecture, someone came over to give a Shalom Aleichem, and he looked up and he saw that it was his old contemporary from Germany, and he gave Shalom Aleichem. And as he put out his hand, this other gentleman, this other rabbinic figure, he could see that he'd lost his hand. He had a hook on his hand. And Rav Hutner was shocked. He said, how did that happen? He says, I just came to tell you that, in fact, you may remember that we had a heated discussion many years ago about Germany, about being cultured and enlightened, and we can learn their values from them. And I want to tell you that I was completely wrong, because during the Holocaust, I was one of the people that was tortured, and they cut off my hand. And as they were doing so, they didn't do so, in anger. They did it as they were doing. They were saying, nicht wahr, isn't this so? Is this okay? Is this so? They did it in a very refined way. And therefore, he said, you were right, that the values of law and order and character traits, we have to learn only from something that's eternal, because otherwise it's subject to change according to who's in power. And it's a very, very important point. When we do what we do, although then we may think that we understand the logic, That's not the motive. That's not the rationale. That's not the reason why we do things, friends. We do it because we believe, as people of faith, that that is what God has commanded us. In fact, you'll find in America in particular, outside most of the courts of law, you'll see the Ten Commandments is still there. The reason why we keep the laws that we keep, the reason why we are ethical and moral is it may make sense to us, but there are other aspects that may not at times make sense and sit comfortably with us. But there is a divine providence, a divine hand, a divine thinking that is the blueprint of the world and understands human nature, having created mankind, and understands what is right and what is wrong. And therefore, we should not be influenced or allow society to start being influenced. And sometimes, it gets in the ethical, medical, ethical world, it becomes exceptionally murky, the waters. We had a case where they wanted to take this baby who was very unwell, and they wanted to take recently take her, you may remember the case, take her to, I think it was Israel or America. They raised the money, and it went to court, and the court ruled that their child could not be taken, and they switched off the machine. And if we go according to human logic, it's very, very, very dangerous. Now, of course, it's a complicated area, and I'm not trying to get into all of this. I'm just pointing out that we have to be very wary. Anyways, that's it for today. I'm afraid I have to rush off, and please God, tomorrow I will be doing at 8:45 tomorrow morning. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us.